All right, hello. In this video, this is just an introduction to inverse functions. All right, so to start off, let's just talk about some inverse operations. These are probably things that you have been seeing since pre-algebra or your Algebra 1 days. So similar to when you were solving something like 3x plus 4 is equal to 16, and you used inverse operations in order to solve for x, right? So you were trying to isolate the x, get it by itself. Well, if you were adding 4, you wanted to subtract 4 from each side. You're doing the inverse operation of adding 4. So then you're left with 3x equals 12. Then do the inverse operation of multiplying by 3, which is dividing by 3. Divide by 3, x equals 4. All right, so again, this is very basic pre-algebra type stuff. But we can see the purpose of using these inverse operations is that we are essentially canceling things out. We are able to undo something from the side that has the x. All right, we're allowed to kind of eliminate it, get away from that side. We're allowed to cancel it out or undo that addition of 4 by then subtracting 4 from each side. So that's going to kind of be a key as we are talking about inverse functions. So at the top here, I've written two inverse functions. Before we really even get into those, let's just define. So an inverse function undoes the original function. Undoes the original function. All right, that's really going to be our loose definition here. All right, obviously this is not necessarily a mathematical definition, but that's just kind of understanding, well, what does an inverse function do? It's going to undo the original function. So like when we go back to here and we see 3x plus 4, well, how do we undo that addition of 4? We subtract 4. 3 times x, how do we undo that multiplication of 3? We divide by 3. All right, so that's what we're doing with these inverse operations. I'm going to kind of erase this little definition that I had written out. And so now here, I just kind of wrote that out. I said f of x equals x plus 4. Let's just say that we have some function f of x equals x plus 4. So like we just said, adding 4 and subtracting 4, those are inverses of one another. So these two functions are inverses. And this notation right here where we see this f, it looks like f to the negative 1 of x, that is read as inverse f of x. So that is the notation when we are talking about the inverse of a specific function. All right, so talking about the inverse of this f of x, we would write f to the negative 1 of x, which is read as inverse f of x. All right, it's read as inverse f of x. So what we want to do now is just kind of take a look at the relationship between the two of these functions. And we're going to find that relationship. Let's just make a little t-chart. Okay, a little x f of x, and then over here we'll do x inverse f of x. All right, we'll plug in negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, and 2 and see what we get out. So if I plug in negative 2, f of negative 2 plus 4 gives me positive 2. Negative 1 plus 4 gives me positive 3. 0 plus 4 is 4, 5, and 6. Well, now what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to plug in some different values for this inverse f of x. I'm going to plug in 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 and see what I get out here. Well, I plug in 2 for x. 2 minus 4 gives me negative 2. 3 minus 4 gives me negative 1. 4 minus 4 is 0. 5 minus 4 is 1. 6 minus 4 is 2. So now let's compare these two charts. All right, compare the two charts. What do we notice? We can see that each xy pair just flipped. Each xy pair flipped. So if I had negative 2 comma 2, now I have 2 comma negative 2. If I had 0 comma 4, now I have 4 comma 0. So that is one of the major keys of inverse functions is the x and y values flip. So x and y flips. All right, and that is going to help us on this next slide find the inverse of a function. All right, just knowing that the x and y flips. So on this next slide, we are given f of x equals negative 2x plus 4. We want to find inverse f of x. Well, let's just rewrite. I'm going to rewrite f of x as just a y equals statement. Y equals negative 2x plus 4. And then I know with inverses that the x and y value flips. Okay, the x's and the y's flip. So that's exactly what we're going to do here. Is we are going to, our first step is flip the x and y. Okay, that's our first step. Flip x and y. So now we have x equals negative 2y plus 4. All right, we can now kind of ignore that. X equals negative 2y plus 4. Well, we look up here and we see it says inverse f of x. So that means our function needs to be a function of x. All right, so what we're going to do here is we'll solve for y in terms of x. And we'll just use inverse operations to do that. So I subtract 4. I get x minus 4 equals negative 2y. And then divide by negative 2. So I get x minus 4 over negative 2 equals y. Well, obviously, if the problem tells me to find inverse f of x, I don't want to write it as a y equals. I'm going to write it as inverse f of x equals. So my second step, sorry, I kind of skipped that, is solve for y. And then my third step is write it as inverse f of x. Okay, and if it was a g of x, then write it as inverse g of x. All right, so my final answer is going to be inverse f of x is equal to x minus 4 divided by a negative 2. That is my final answer to the inverse of f of x. Hope this helped you guys out. Best of luck on the homework.